Hello Matrix, and welcome to our series of videos on the perfect market. There are three different equilibrium positions in the short run: normal profit, economic profit, and economic loss. In our previous lessons, we examined the normal profit position as well as the economic profit position. In today's lesson, we will be focusing specifically on the economic loss in the short run with the aid of an explanation of the economic loss, a drawing of the graph, and a discussion thereof. So let's kick off today's lesson by recapping what we did in lesson 5 and 6. In lesson 5, we examined normal profit, and we know that normal profit is the ideal position of the perfect market and occurs where total costs are equal to the firm's total revenue, alternatively when the firm's average costs are equal to its average revenue. Let me write that down. Normal profit occurs when the firm's total revenue is equal to its total costs, alternatively when its average revenue is equal to its average cost. Then in lesson 6, we examined economic profit, which is not the ideal of the perfect market, and it occurs when the firm's total revenue exceeds its total costs, alternatively where its average revenue exceeds its average costs. So let's fill that in. Economic profit, total revenue exceeds total costs, alternatively the average revenue exceeds average costs. So in today's lesson, we will be focusing on the economic loss situation, and that occurs when the firm's total costs are higher than the firm's revenue. Another way of putting this is by saying the firm's total costs exceeds its total revenue, or its average costs exceeds its average revenue. So let's fill that in. Economic loss, which is what we're dealing with today, occurs when the total revenue is less than the total cost and the average revenue is less than its average cost. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a drawing of the graph. I'm going to take you through it step by step so that by the end of it you feel confident enough to draw it yourself. I'm going to start off by just drawing the skeleton of the graph, which is what I like to do first. Just put in my axes there. Let's go through it step by step. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to insert our heading. So let's insert our heading. We're dealing with economic loss. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw and label the vertical and the horizontal axis. So that is price, cost, revenue. And this is, of course, quantity. Right, tick. We're going to draw and label our revenue curve. So let's just put that in, and then let's label it. D, which is equal to AR, which is equal to MR. We know that this curve is perfectly elastic, so let's tick that off. And now we're going to draw and label the average cost curve. Now remember, grade 12s, we are busy with economic loss. And what we are trying to illustrate graphically is we're trying to illustrate that the firm's average costs exceed its average revenue. So that means that we're going to be drawing the average cost curve above the average revenue curve, because that will of course indicate that we have in fact made a loss. So let's fill in our average cost curve. Let's label it and let's tick that off. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to draw and label our marginal cost curve, and we must remember that the average cost curve intersects the marginal cost curve at its lowest point, so around about there, I would say. So let's fill in our marginal cost curve. Let's label it. Tick. Now we are going to indicate the profit maximization point, which is where the marginal revenue is equal to our marginal cost. That's my marginal cost curve. That's my marginal revenue curve. Where they intersect, in other words, at that point, that is, of course, my equilibrium. So let me fill in my equilibrium. And from my equilibrium point, grade 12s, I can now formulate the price, which I'm going to fill in, And remember, this is fictitious figures. I'm just assigning this fictitious figures. They are made up figures, so you can fill in whichever figures you feel comfortable with. I'm assigning it a figure of 10 or Q1, and I'm going to give this a figure of 40 Rand, and that a figure of 50 Rand. And I'm also going to call this P1. I'm going to call this C. I'm going to call this B. So I've indicated my profit maximization point, and now I'm also going to indicate my economic loss. This area here, grade 12s, is my economic loss area, because you can see that my average cost curve clearly lies above my average revenue area, and I'm actually going to shade it in. So let me just shade that in, indicating it in red, because red usually indicates a loss. So that's my economic loss. So let's recap all of this. I've got to insert a heading, tick. I've got to draw and label the vertical and horizontal axes, done. I've got to draw and label the revenue curves, done. I've got to draw and label my average cost curve, done. I've indicated it above my average revenue curve to indicate a loss. I've drawn and labeled my marginal cost curve, and it's gone through in the middle of the average cost curve. I've indicated my profit maximization point, E, and I've indicated my equilibrium price, and I've also indicated my economic loss area. What we're now going to complete is we're going to do a discussion of the graph, and it's always, as I constantly remind you, a good idea to start off with the definition of the concept that you are dealing with. So, an economic loss occurs when the firm's costs are higher than the firm's revenue. The equilibrium is formulated where the marginal cost intersects with the marginal revenue curve, which is at point E. In other words, that's my marginal cost curve, that's my marginal revenue curve, it intersects at point E. At point E, the equilibrium price is 40 Rand. Point E, my equilibrium price is 40 Rand, or P1. My equilibrium quantity is 10, or Q1. The average cost curve lies above the average revenue curve, clearly so. And that indicates that the average cost is more than the average revenue, and that the firm has incurred an economic loss. That economic loss is depicted here. So now what we're going to do, grade 12s, is we're going to calculate the economic loss. We use exactly the same formula that we've used in the past to calculate the profit. In other words, total revenue minus total costs. So let's deal with the total revenue first. To work out our total revenue, we're going to say average revenue times by quantity. So that's my average revenue. I'm going to say 40 Rand times by 10 Rand, which will give me 400 Rand. And now I'm going to work out my total costs. So I'm going to say 50 Rand times by 10, and that will give me 500 Rand. We can clearly see, grade 12s, that my total costs exceed my total revenue, and that means that the firm has incurred an economic loss of 100 Rand. Now we're going to use our alternative method, where we say average revenue minus average cost. In other words, we're going to say 40 Rand minus 50 Rand. That will give me a loss of 10 Rand, or in other words, negative 10. And now I'm going to say that negative 10 times by 10, and that will of course give me a loss of 100 Rand. Either way, once again, grade 12s, we come to exactly the same answer, so it really doesn't matter which method you choose to calculate it. If you have chosen not to use figures as I have, and instead you are more comfortable with letters, that's absolutely fine. Let's look at the letters method. So if we were working out our total revenue area, it would be this area here, and that is of course O, P1, E, Q1. And then if we had to calculate our total cost area, it would be this area here, which is O, C, B, Q1. Our economic loss would be the difference between our total revenue and our total cost. In other words, P1, C, B, E. Grade 12s, you should now be able to draw and explain the economic loss position. After videos 5, 6, and video 7, today's video, you should also be able to do an essay on the short-run equilibrium profit positions. Thank you very much.
Check out the video description below for practice questions from our study guides. If you found this video useful, give it a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new episodes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook to stay on top of the latest TAS news and launches. So that's it for now from the Answer Series, your key to exam success.